Welcome to Knowledge for the Soul, the podcast where we explore the profound connections between our daily lives and our true well-being. Each episode, we dive into essential topics of health, bridging the physical, psychological, and spiritual dimensions to equip you with the practical, evidence-based knowledge that empowers you to thrive and live your best life. Whether you're navigating stress, building healthier habits, strengthening relationships, or seeking greater inner peace and purpose, this is your space for real insights. Here we have thoughtful discussions and we discuss actionable steps towards lasting change. I'm your host, Aaron Harris. I'm a registered nurse, and recently, between the last episode and now, I have now recently finished my classes and have achieved my bachelorette in nursing. So I went from associate's degree in nursing to now bachelor's degree in nursing. And I remain just as passionate, if not more, about holistic wellness. And today, we're going to be diving into a truly transformative and timely topic, emotions. And before I dive into the content of this episode, I wanted to share that this particular episode is going to be something that really resonates with me, and it's something that I'm very passionate about and has affected me so much in my life, as all of us, I think, have been affected by emotions. So I will do my best to articulate this podcast as best as possible, but I truly believe that there is not enough time in the world to really go through all the different degrees. In fact, this particular topic could span multiple episodes easily, right? But I'm going to try my best to not only use words that try to convey the core message of what I'm trying to say, but also try to fit everything in. So when you're listening to this episode, I challenge you to really think about what I'm saying behind the words, because the words themselves may not always be the best words of choice, but definitely pointing at the truth that I'm trying to uncover through the communication with you guys. Okay, so what are emotions? Well, in simpler terms, emotions are automatic responses that combine a couple of things. Subjective experience. It's that part, that feeling part, what it feels like inside, like a rush of joy or a knot of fear, right? Another part that's combined, it has to do with your physiological changes, right? When you're experiencing emotions, your body goes through physiological changes such as increased heart rate, sweating, muscle tension, and hormone release like adrenaline and cortisol, right? Other things involved include behavioral or expressive responses such as outward signs like smiling, frowning, fleeing, approaching, yelling, or freezing, right? These three components, right? The subjective experience, the physiological changes of the body, and the behavioral expressions that we see exhibited are the three components that work together to help us respond effectively to our environment without always needing conscious deliberation or that deep inner thinking, right? You know, think of when we plan something, we take our time, we think about, well, this emotions allow us to respond without that deep thought process, because simply it could be a circumstance where there isn't the time for that sort of deep thought process, right? So why are emotions important to our health? Let's talk about it. Emotions are crucial for our overall health because they act like a bridge between our inner experiences and our physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being. They aren't just fleeting reactions. No, they influence how our body functions, how our mind processes life, and how we find meaning and connection. Healthy emotional experiences and regulation promotes resilience, recovery, and longevity, while chronic suppression and dysregulation can lead to significant harm, right? So you don't want to suppress your emotions And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but we're touching on that here in this section, right? And we also want to understand the importance of managing our emotions as well, because being dysregulated as well can cause significant harm, right? So emotions are positive, but when suppressed or dysregulated, cause harm, right? They're negative for our health. So let's talk a little bit about our emotions, some of the common emotions that people experience, and what the triggers are, the typical bodily response, and the adaptive purpose. So there are some main core emotions, right? And there's a lot of different emotions, but there's the main core emotions that dictate the majority of our responses. And when you combine two or more emotions, you get different names, right? I'll give one quick example. Anxiety. I feel like a lot of us, especially in today's society and everything going on, we know about anxiety, right? Well, anxiety is a form of fear, right? Anxiety, the core emotion behind anxiety is fear, right? But there's more mixed into it. And then it becomes from fear to anxiety, right? Which is a sub emotion underneath that of the umbrella of fear. So hopefully that provides a good example of what I mean, that there are sub emotions behind or after these core emotions that we're going to discuss. So let's talk about it. Well, happiness, right? Well, that's a core emotion, right? What's the trigger for happiness, right? It is the trigger for happiness is goal achievement and connection. What is the typical behavioral and bodily response? Well, you'll see someone smiling, right? You'll see someone having feelings of warmth. That would be the subjective inner portion, right? And you'll see a relaxed body, which is the physiological portion, right? Adaptive purposes of happiness. What are those? Well, happiness serves to bond and reinforce helpful behavior. That's its purpose, right? That's how happiness helps us, right? Sadness. The core trigger for sadness is loss and separation. A typical bodily response includes tears, low energy, withdraw. What's the purpose? What's the adaptive purpose of sadness? Well, it's to process loss, and it could be used to elicit support. Let's talk about fear, which we already briefly started to talk about. Fear, what's the core trigger? A threat to safety, right? There's a physiological aspect of how someone is impacted, has to do with your heart rate increasing, right? You're going to feel like you have tunnel vision, right? That's subjective experience, and you're going to freeze. Some of the typical bodily responses, people have different responses, right? But those are going to be some of the main ones that you see often. And what is the purpose of fear? Well, it's immediate survival. Let's talk about anger. Anger hits home with me. Guilty. Well, anger, what's the core trigger of anger? Well, it's a blocked goal. Oh man, just reading this, I'm having insight to my own life and my own moments of anger. A blocked goal for me is 100% something that can elicit anger within me. Injustice. Oh, that's another one. Definitely. And some of the typical bodily responses when it comes to experiencing anger, well, you're going to feel warm, hot, right? You're going to have that facial expression, right? That behavioral response, right? You're going to experience tension in the muscles. And your focus is not going to be as wide. It's going to be a lot more narrowed because you're focusing on what it is that is upsetting you, right? And what's the purpose of anger, right? Well, it's to remove the obstacle and protect boundaries. And a little bit about anger that I like to tell people, so I'm going to throw this in there, is that anger can be used in one of two ways. Anger can be used to destroy, and anger can be used to create, right? So it's all about how you harness this emotion, but all emotions. That makes the difference of if the adaptive purpose of the emotion is not only met, but serves you in a positive way, not only in the short term, but in the long term. Disgust, another core emotion. Well, what is the trigger of disgust? Contamination, right? It could be a physical disgust, right? As a nurse, I see those things. I think you guys can imagine some of the things that I see without really diving too into it here with my words here on the podcast, right? So you have your physical triggers that cause the emotion of disgust. Then you have your moral triggers that cause the emotion of disgust. When something goes down or occurs that does not align with your morals. What are some of the typical bodily responses, right? What are the things you're going to see? Well, a person may experience things like nausea, right? Subjectively, they're feeling like they repulsed, right? Which is another feeling in a way. And they will turn away, right, from something, like thinking, picture you see something gross, you want to look away. Those are some of the behaviors that you will see and that someone will experience when dealing with the emotion of disgust. Now, what is the point of such a feeling? What is the adaptive purpose of the feeling of disgust? Well, it's to avoid harm or toxic influence, right? Surprise, very powerful, common emotion. So when something unexpected occurs, some of the typical bodily responses include wide eyes. You'll see a person's eyes widen, right? Like, what? They can get startled depending if there's a loud sound or depending on how quickly whatever the event is that they are influenced by is, right? And the orientation is brief. What's the adaptive purpose of the emotion of surprise? Well, it's to rapidly reassess the situation. Contempt. I feel like contempt hits home with a lot of us. Especially as you get older, you have reasons to feel feelings of contempt towards someone or something, right? What's the core trigger of feelings of contempt? Moral inferiority of another. You'll see an asymmetrical expression in a person experiencing contempt. It's a one-sided smirk, right? It's a one-sided smirk, and then you may feel feelings of apathy, right? Things like that in terms of contempt. Now, what's the purpose, the adaptive purpose of the emotion contempt? Well, one adaptive purpose of the emotion of contempt is it serves to reinforce social hierarchy, right? There is a social hierarchy, and what determines where people are in that social hierarchy or where they move in terms of reinforcing those things has to do with contempt, right? The emotion of contempt. Another emotion, powerful emotion, shame. What is the core trigger of shame? Self-failure, right? You're ashamed of something you did. or you're ashamed of something you did not do, right? What are some of the typical bodily responses? Well, you're wanting to hide. You're wanting to go away, right? You're going to see someone looking for an exit, someone not wanting to be feeling those feelings and trying to escape them in any way that they can, right? Those are going to be some of the typical responses you'll see. And what is the adaptive purpose of shame? Well, it has to do with conforming to social norms, right? Of course, this can backfire. In fact, all of these emotions can backfire on you, right? It just depends on understanding what they are, understanding what the purpose is, and ensuring that you are not dysregulated, right? And ensuring that you are not suppressing these emotions. Those are the two things about emotions. If you want emotions to work for you, there's two things that you have to ensure are done: being regulated and ensuring that you are not suppressing your emotions, right? Some other emotions we can talk a little bit about, and I think this is having to do with shame, but guilt is an emotion that a lot of us feel, right? And we already talked about happiness, but love and affection, right? Sometimes involves romantic love and compassion and tenderness, right? And it's a bonding and caregiving emotion, right? So there's a lot out there. There's a lot of emotions out there. Those are some of the main core emotions, right? In other emotions that you experience, you can see some kind of blend of one or two or more of the emotions, right? So what are some of the challenges of emotional regulation? Let's talk a little bit about that. Well, emotional regulation, that's our ability to influence which emotions we have, when we have them, and how we express them and how we experience them. And emotional regulation is key to our mental health, right? A lot of us know the term self-control, right? Self-control has to do with, me deciding if I want to have my vitamins every morning, right? I had to throw a little medical example in there. Things like deciding not to scroll for too long on social media, right? And through those funny videos or those algorithmic videos that we all love so much, right? That's self-control. A lot of us know the term self-control, but what a lot of us don't know is the term self-command. And I recommend that you look it up. Self-command, one, the word exists and the definition exists because it is absolutely possible. Now, what is self-command? Well, self-command is exactly what we were just describing here, right? With emotional regulation, right? We get to decide how we experience, when we experience our emotions, or when we're going to allow our emotions to really flood through our bodies, and to what degree. We get to decide that, right? So maybe not when exactly, but also the degree of how we allow our emotions to affect us, right? We get to control how we express our emotions and how we experience them, right? That's self-command. And that should be the goal for us all. Self-control, of course. A lot of people know about self-control, and I don't think that's something that is lost on any of you listening here today. But self-command, you don't hear that often talked about in social circles, amongst friends, amongst family, other podcasts, things like that. Self-command, the ability to control our emotions, the ability to be regulated entirely and use our emotions in ways that we see fit, right? Emotions are energy is one way to look at it. Controlling that energy and using it for our benefit, that's emotional regulation. And it's a key skill if your goal is to maintain healthy mental health, right? It's important for relationships. It's important for daily functioning. And as I mentioned, it is often challenging for many people, And difficulties can range from mild, situational, to severe and chronic dysregulation, right? When it's not managed correctly, you can have dysregulation in those forms from the mild to the chronic, right? So here are some of the major challenges that people commonly face when they're trying to regulate emotions effectively. And again, as I mentioned before, I am a student of emotional regulation, as all of you are. So I don't speak from a point of view without those principles in mind and without those principles aimed right back at me, right? So here are some of the major challenges that people face when they're trying to regulate their emotions effectively. Intense or overwhelming emotions, right? Emotions can feel disproportionately strong or sudden. For example, going from 0 to 100 in seconds over something minor. Something small can happen. And for some reason, your emotional trigger is activated. And remember, I talked about that flood of emotion. It's intense. You have your entire physical system of your body affected through this emotion. Emotion happens, then your heart rate increases, then this happens, then your thought process happens, then your facial expressions happen, then the reaction happens, and it's so powerful. But the actual trigger itself could be something minor, right? It makes it so difficult to take a step back, so difficult to respond thoughtfully. And instead, people often defer to reacting impulsively, yelling, slamming doors, withdrawing, right? These are some of the things that happen when we're not able to gain regulation, right? And you can see these sort of things happening in people with diagnosed mental health conditions, such as ADHD, where emotional intensity is amplified, or when someone has experienced trauma, right? Where the nervous system, in essence, is primed for threat, right? Another thing that can make things challenging when it comes to regulating emotions effectively have to do with difficulty identifying and labeling emotions. And I've caught myself doing this too. Many struggle to recognize what they're feeling, right? Mistaking anxiety for anger, right? Or being overwhelmed for sadness, right? It's sort of, think of dyslexia, but when it comes to emotions, right? Trouble putting words into feelings, right? It blocks the first step of regulation. Because in order to be regulated with your emotions, you have to be aware of what you're feeling, right? So awareness is key for emotional regulation. Being able to name and understand the emotions you're feeling is important for emotional regulation. And without naming the emotion, it's harder to choose an effective response, one that, again, is good for the short term and good for the long term, right? Another barrier or challenge to emotional regulation is trouble calming down once upset, right? For me, I defer to meditation and journaling to reset when I realize that I'm dysregulated, right? So understanding when you're dysregulated is the first step, right? And you can easily tell when you're dysregulated because you can feel a physical response happening, right? Whatever that response is, you can feel it. So understanding that you're dysregulated is the first step to understanding these processes that we're discussing here, right? Where it's understanding that you are experiencing intense emotions, understanding that it's important to label your emotions, understanding that you now need to calm yourself to a point of understanding and feeling like you are back regulated with your emotions, right? So when it comes to trouble calming down one's upset, the emotions, they linger longer than the situation warrants. People stay stuck in anger, sadness, or anxiety for hours or even days. Recovery is slow because the brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, it stays activated, which overrides calmer thinking in the prefrontal cortex, right? So those of you who have listened to earlier episodes, I'm sure that I've touched on what's called the limbic system, which is absolutely involved in the emotional responses. So when it comes to the brain's threat detection system, the amygdala, and its activation, that of course overrides calmer thinking in the prefrontal cortex, right? So important to think about that. Reliance on maladaptive strategies is another barrier to emotional regulation, right? What are your responses when you're dysregulated? Are they healthy or are they unhealthy? And what is your degree of reliance on those coping mechanisms, right? People often default to unhelpful coping mechanisms like suppression. It's like when you push your feelings down. Again, as I mentioned, you cannot suppress your emotions without negative short-term and long-term effects. Rumination, guilty. Endless overthinking. You're almost in a loop when you're ruminating. You're thinking of what it is that puts you in that emotion, and you're going in circles and circles, causing you to perpetually feel that emotion far longer than is necessary and far longer than it can be used to serve you in a positive way. Maladaptive strategies include avoiding, not wanting to address the issue directly with someone or something. Avoiding. Substance use. You see this all the time where people get into drugs when it comes to managing their emotions. It's a maladaptive strategy. Or hurting yourself. You see people as well doing self-harm, right? For some of you, I know that hits home, right? In terms of someone you know or something that you may have experienced personally, right? So maladaptive strategies. These provide short-term relief, but they worsen long-term regulation by reinforcing the very habits needed to achieve greater emotional regulation and skills at that, right? Impulsivity or poor impulse control. Strong emotions hijack decision-making, leading to rash actions, right? Again, you're dysregulated, your amygdala is activated, your limbic system is active, and you make decisions that aren't well thought through. Even if it's short term and you don't have that much time, you can still think of the best move or the better move when you are not in a place of emotional dysregulation, right? So some examples of a rash action is saying hurtful things, quitting jobs impulsively, or binge eating, right? This is especially common in ADHD or borderline personality traits, where the brakes on emotional impulses are weaker. Another barrier to emotional regulation is frequent mood swings or emotional volatility, right? Emotional volatility. I was just using that word the other day. Or actually emotional lability, right? It's rapid shifts between emotions which create instability. Happy one moment, deeply frustrated the next. This unpredictably strains relationships and self-esteem as people feel out of control or unreliable. Challenges and high stress or triggering situations. Under pressure, work deadlines, conflict, rejection, regulation skills break down more easily, right? So this is another challenge to emotional regulation. Chronic stress keeps the nervous system in sympathetic overdrive, which is that high energy that I mentioned, right? You have your sympathetic, which is your high energy, and you have your parasympathetic, which is relaxing, right? Making calm states harder to access, right? Another barrier to emotional regulation is the impact on relationships and social functioning, right? Unregulated emotions leads to outbursts, withdrawal, or miscommunication, causing misunderstandings, conflict, or isolation. Others may pull away, reinforcing feelings of shaming or unworthiness, which create a vicious cycle. Another barrier includes underlying biological, developmental, or environmental factors. Neurobiological challenges, right? Differences in the brain regions, for example, a underdeveloped prefrontal cortex or a overactive amygdala or limbic system make regulation inherently harder, right? We're not all built the same physically. Therefore, the different challenges that we have in terms of why our emotions are difficult to regulate on a biological or physiological level are inherently different, right? So understanding that is a significant barrier, right, is important. And also the environmental factors, right? Where did we grow up? What was the societal norm of emotional expression, etc.? Those things all play, what's the cultural norms? Those things all play a pivotal role in terms of emotional regulation. Right? Early experiences, trauma, inconsistent caregiving, or adverse childhood events disrupt the development of regulation skills. Co-occurring conditions like ADHD, anxiety, depression, PTSD, autism, or borderline personality disorder often involve built-in regulation difficulties. Beliefs and attitude about emotions. Viewing emotions as bad or weak or uncontrollable, it creates resistance, right? There are those who believe in emotions making someone weak. You can see this in Stoic sort of ideologies, right? Stoicism, right? Especially amongst men, Stoicism is something that is oftentimes reinforced in cultures, but looking at emotions as bad or weak or uncontrollable creates resistance, right? You don't want to resist your emotions. You don't want to look at your emotions as bad or weak. This judgment adds secondary distress, right? Feeling bad about feeling bad, which makes regulation even more difficult. These challenges are not character flaws. They're often rooted in how the brain and the nervous system developed or adapted to past experiences. But the good news is that emotional regulation is a learnable skill through practices like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral techniques, dialectical behavior therapy, skills, breath work. I love breath work. I'm such a fan of breath work, therapy, and consistent self-compassion. Progress is gradual, right? Depending on where you are on this emotional regulation journey, understand that your progress is going to be gradual. You are not overnight going to become this regulated individual. No, it's little by little, making progress through the different techniques that I mentioned, right? But even small improvements, right? They start to add up. They start to reduce stress, strengthen relationships, and improve overall well-being. If these struggles feel overwhelming or persistent, working with a therapist as well can help make a big difference, right? How do we deal with the negative emotions that we experience? Well, here are some effective evidence-based ways to deal with negative emotions like anger, sadness, fear, anxiety, shame, or frustration, for examples. These strategies draw from psychology research, including cognitive behavioral approaches, mindfulness, acceptance-based methods, and emotional regulation techniques. The key is to acknowledge the emotion without judgment and process it healthily, and to use the tools that reduce its intensity or help it pass more quickly, rather than suppressing, denying, or ruminating on it, which all of those things make it worse. 1. Name and accept the emotion. Label it, accept it. Simply identifying and naming what you're feeling, right? This is anger. I'm feeling anger right now. Shows awareness and increases your ability to be emotionally regulated. Research shows that effective affect labeling reduces amygdala activity, the brain's fear center, and lowers emotional intensity. So simply by recognizing the emotion that you experience, you're going to feel that the intensity of the emotion drop down a little bit, right? Accept what you're feeling without fighting it. Tell yourself, it's okay to feel this. Emotions are temporary signals. Studies on habitual acceptance show it leads to less negative emotion over time and better psychological health by preventing escalation or secondary distress, like feeling guilty about feeling bad, right? So I'm going to segue a little bit off topic and talk about relationships, romantic relationships specifically, because I think that this points out something that I try to communicate to people and that partners should communicate to each other. All emotions are temporary signals. So when it comes to building a romantic relationship with someone, right? You don't want to build a romantic relationship with someone based on emotions alone, right? Because they are, as much as you're going to feel so good about somebody and so positive about somebody, they're going to be temporary signals. So there are going to be times where you feel good emotionally about your partner. There's going to be times where you feel bad emotionally about your partner, but being consistent is absolutely important, and remaining committed and communicating and managing your emotions and bringing the emotionally regulated you to every circumstance, to every situation, is still going to be important. But I've heard the argument that people should base the relationship, who they choose to be romantically involved with long term, whether it develops into marriage, parenthood, etc., based on emotions alone, and that is not a recipe for success. And why? Because all emotions are temporary, including the feeling of love. While we may exhibit love through consistent action, the feeling itself is a temporary signal, and it comes and it goes, as do all emotions. Now, I know some of you may want to argue with me on this, and I welcome those discussions. I welcome those points being brought to me. Now, moving back on topic, practicing deep breathing or physiological calming techniques, that's going to help you, right? It's going to help you with dealing with your negative emotions, right? Inhale for 4 counts, or count to 4, and while you're inhaling, count to 4, right? Hold for 4 seconds, right? And exhale or breathe out for about 6 to 8 seconds or so, right? It's called box breathing, right? So it's going to lower your heart rate, it's going to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, and it's going to lower your cortisol levels, right? So if you're doing any task from a place of anxiety or a place of dysregulation, I challenge you to do some breathing techniques and watch your mind come up with better solutions, simply because you are in a calmer state or regulated state of mind, right? Other things you can do is progressive muscle relaxation, right? Grounding exercises, which quickly interrupt the fight or flight response, which I won't go into. Go ahead and look that up. Progressive muscle relaxation techniques or grounding exercises, right? Other things that can help with dealing with negative emotions include cognitive reappraisal or reframing. Shift your perspective. My very first episode that I ever did for this podcast series is called Changing Your Narrative, or Changing the Narrative, right? That's exactly what this is. Cognitive reappraisal, cognitive reframing. Shift your perspective. Ask, what else could this mean? Or is this as bad as it feels right now? View a setback as a learning opportunity instead of a total failure. But you can only do cognitive reframing if you're able to take a step back and calm yourself. Meditate. Use a technique that's healthy to calm yourself first. Okay? This is one of the most researched emotional regulation strategies, cognitive reframing, that is. It changes emotional impact by altering how you interpret the situation, often reducing stress more effectively than suppression. Right? Oh, we're going to come up with one of my favorite ways to deal with negative emotions. Express or journal about it. Talk to a friend, a therapist. Write out in the journal. Expressive writing, putting thoughts and feelings into words, process them, and reduce rumination. Be specific. Note what triggered it. how your body feels, and any unhelpful thoughts. This helps gain insight and prevents buildup of emotions. But when you don't address your emotions, right, they can build up. Absolutely, they can build up. And I can tell you, not only within myself that I've seen this, but within others. And a lot of you have seen someone overreact to a situation, but it's due to the other situations that they had not processed emotionally, leading up to that overall emotional reaction, right? Using healthy distraction or temporary shifts when intensity is high can be a useful way to deal with negative emotions. Now, we're not talking about avoidance and we're not talking about suppression, but sometimes in order to snap out of it, you need to take a moment and use a healthy distraction, right? So for example, overwhelming emotions. For me, right, solving a Rubik's Cube would be great, right? While I'm in an emotionally dysregulated state, that would be a fantastic way to distract myself, right? Or doing a puzzle, right? Or going on a walk, or engaging in a hobby. Video gaming, right? To an extent, is a one way to help as a healthy distraction. Listening to music, right? Or exercise. All of these temporary healthy distractions are helpful. And I say temporary like that because it's important that they are understood to be temporary methods, not meant to be long-term or suppressive in terms of their use, which those who do suppress emotions oftentimes use distraction techniques, but not to face their emotions or give them that space or pause to collect themselves, but as a means to never or try to never face those emotions, which is not healthy, right? So research shows that distraction works better for high intensity emotions, while reappraisal suits lower intensity ones, right? Avoid harmful distractions, excessive scrolling on social media, or doing drugs. Choose ones that restore energy and control. Move your body. Physical activity is such a powerful way to deal with negative emotions. Exercise, even take a short walk outside. Release those neurochemicals, the endorphins that reduce stress hormones and improve mood. Fresh air, nature, exposure. These things amplify this effect. Activities like yoga or stretch combined movement with mindfulness for double benefits, right? Another way to deal with negative emotions, practice self-compassion and gratitude. Talk to yourself kindly. This is hard, and it's normal to feel this way. I'm doing my best. Self-compassion buffers against negative spirals. Shift by noticing 3 things you're grateful for, even small ones. Gratitude practices build positive emotional resources and counteract negativity bias. Challenge unhelpful thoughts, cognitive restructuring. Identify distorted thinking. Like, are you catastrophizing? Are you saying, this is always happening to me? And test it with evidence. What is the proof for this conclusion that I have? What is a more balanced view? Are there other ways that I could be looking at this situation? Cognitive reframing. This is a cognitive behavioral therapy based technique that reduces the fuel for negative emotions. Wonderful person in the chat mentions going for iced coffee and a walk is something that works for me. Exactly. Yeah. That's definitely a way, I would say, a way to help you with moving your body, right? Taking a walk outside, or doing an activity that takes your mind off of that intense emotion for a moment, right? Plus, with the iced coffee example, right? You're going to be, usually with iced coffee, you're going to have something sweet or it's going to taste good, right? Obviously. And those things also elicit positive neurochemical responses, which are good for helping you get to a place of feeling emotionally regulated, right? Moving on here we talked about compassion, challenging unhelpful thoughts. Let's talk about building long-term habits and seeking support. Regular mindfulness meditation, right? Or guided practices. You can use all these tools like apps and all kinds of stuff, right? Strengthen regulation over time. And I can speak to this personally too. Meditation is one of the biggest, most important tools that I've ever used in my whole life, by far, when it comes to emotional regulation, right? I hear this from people often, that I can't possibly meditate because I can't sit still for that long. And what I tell them is meditation is actually a skill, and it takes practice. So for those of you who are new and getting into meditation or want to get into meditation, understand that it is a completely normal response to feel like you're not able to sit still or keep your eyes closed or etc. for that amount of time. Yes, and you don't have to start by doing 5 minutes right out of the bat. Start with 30 seconds. Start with 1 minute. Right? And there's different ways to do meditation. I was also talking about this with some people the other day, right? One of the meditation methods that I like to use the most is I like to use meditation where I'm counting my number of breaths. Each inhale, each exhale is 1. And I go as high as I can go. And when I get distracted by a thought, I calmly say, oh, okay, well, that's clearly something that's been popping up in my mind. But let's get back to the counting. Let's get back to counting my breaths. And I start from 1 again. And I continue to do that for whatever designated amount of time that I've set for meditating, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I've done hours of meditation before. So that's one method. Another method is a guided meditation, where you hear someone speaking, helping you guide you through the meditation. Another that you can do is focus on an object visually and stare at that object, and only stare at that object as you focus on your breathing, right? Focused meditation. And then another one that I'll mention that I know right offhand, and I use this so often because I'm not sure how many of you are aware of imposter syndrome. I recommend looking it up if you're not familiar, but imposter syndrome is something that I've experienced, and I imagine I will experience in the future as well. And how I overcome imposter syndrome is I meditate and visualize myself in that role where I feel an imposter being successful and embracing it. And I'll take my time and I'll meditate that. For example, nursing, right? When I was a new nurse, right? And I'm still a new nurse, but when I was a new nurse, one of the things that I struggled with was seeing myself as a nurse. Like, you are a nurse, you're this nurse. And I felt like a fraud, right? But that was imposter syndrome. So what I did, because I recognized that this was the case with me, is I would spend the time and meditate and close my eyes and see myself saving lives, see myself making decisions, see myself as the nurse that I was. And I continued to do this until I felt the change within my thought process, right? So meditation has a lot of uses, but we're talking about it in the context of emotional regulation, right? But those are some of the ways you can use meditation to enhance your emotional regulation, build long-term habits, and support, right? If your negative emotions are frequent, intense, or they interfere with life, you should consider therapy, right? We already talked about cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and these things teach important skills. And again, skills are something to practice and work towards, right? You're not going to start off skilled at anything right off the bat. So be compassionate with yourself, right? Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate negative emotions. They are normal, they're adaptive, but also learn to respond to them in ways that don't prolong suffering and don't cause harm to yourself or others, right? Start with 1 or 2 strategies that I mentioned that feel doable. Practice consistently and be patient, right? Regulation improves with repetition through neuroplasticity. If emotions feel overwhelming or persistent, reaching out to a mental health professional is a strong proactive step. There's no shame in that. You've got this. 1 breath, 1 small action at a time. Now let's talk about the negative impacts of these addressed emotions on a physical, psychological, and spiritual level. Let's explain the positives when handled correctly and the negatives when emotions are handled incorrectly. The negative impacts of unaddressed negative emotions, physical, psychological, and spiritual. Negative emotions such as anger, sadness, fear, anxiety, shame, and frustration are natural and adaptive signals from our nervous system, as we mentioned. They evolve to help us respond. However, these emotions can become chronic. When these emotions become chronic, unprocessed, or poorly managed, they can cascade into significant harm across our physical, psychological, and spiritual well-being. This is especially relevant in the context of unhealthy relationship dynamics, where emotions like resentment, fear of abandonment, or suppressed anger fuel cycles of toxicity. So I'm going to break down some of the negative impacts of emotions that are left unaddressed, and I'm going to talk about some of the positives too. Chronic or dysregulated negative emotions keep the nervous system in a prolonged state of fight or flight or sympathetic state. They elevate stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and this creates a feedback loop that erodes your health over time, right? And with your physical body, you're going to see cardiovascular strain or heart strain. Anger and anxiety raise your blood pressure and heart rate, increasing hypertension, right? Increase the risk of heart attacks and stroke, right? Chronic anger, according to the American Heart Association, is associated with a 19% higher risk of coronary heart disease, right? Unregulated emotions suppress the immune system and increase inflammation. Fear and sadness elevate inflammatory markers, the C-reactive protein, which weakens immunity and slows healing. This contributes to autoimmune flares, frequent illness, and chronic pain conditions such as migraines or fibromyalgia. Digestive and sleep disruptions. Shame and frustration trigger the gut-brain axis, or like irritable bowel syndrome, for example, while anxiety disrupts sleep cycles, leading to fatigue, weight gain, and metabolic problems, right? So unregulated emotions interrupt the digestive and sleep cycles, right? Another important and really unfortunate to see in life, because I have seen this in people in real life, it accelerates your aging when you do not regulate your emotions. Long-term emotional stress shortens telomeres, a protective DNA component, which speeds cellular aging and raises the risk for diseases like diabetes and cancer. Right? So these are some of the physical consequences of not managing your emotions. Let's talk about the psychological health impacts, right? Anxiety and depression cycles. That's what happens when you're not managing your emotions from a psychological perspective. Unprocessed fear or sadness reinforces rumination, amplifying symptoms. For example, anxiety disorders affects 40 million US adults, often rooted in unresolved relational stress. Low self-esteem and emotional exhaustion. Shame erodes self-worth, leading to avoidance behaviors, while anger can turn inward as self-criticism, fostering burnout and emotional numbness. Cognitive impairments. Chronic emotions impair focus, memory, right? Your hippocampal shrinkage. Your hippocampus is responsible by how you form memories. So you're going to have your ability to form memories diminished through poor emotional regulation and decision making. It's going to make it harder to break unhealthy patterns in relationships or habits. Interpersonal strain. These emotions spill over, causing irritability or withdrawal that damages connections, perpetuating isolation. Let's talk a little bit about the spiritual or existential health impacts when you are not handling your emotions in a healthy way. You're going to experience an erosion of inner peace and purpose. Persistent negativity creates a sense of disconnection from one's values, creativity, or sense of meaning, leading to feelings of emptiness or stuckness in life. Hindered growth and resilience is a byproduct spiritually of not handling your emotions properly. Emotions like fear or shame block self-reflection and personal evolution, fostering a victim mindset or avoidance of deeper fulfillment. A reduced sense of interconnectedness in relationships. Unaddressed emotions breed resentment or distrust. diminishing the joy of authentic bonds and a broader sense of belonging in the world. Overall, these impacts are interconnected. Physical tolls, for example, inflammation, worsen psychological states, which in turn deepen spiritual disconnection, creating a downward spiral. Now let's talk about the positives, right? I mean, we went through a lot of negatives there. Probably didn't make us feel very good. Well, let's talk about some of the positives, right? When we address emotions through healthy regulation and use these strategies that we discussed. Well, some of the physical benefits include reduced stress hormones leading to better health, stronger immunity, improved sleep, improved digestion cycles, right? Basically the opposite of all the stuff we're talking about, right? For example, processing anger constructively, like through exercise, lowers inflammation and boosts endorphins, which promotes longevity, right? You know, studies on emotional granularity show people who handle emotions well have fewer physical symptoms and faster recovery from illness, right? Psychological health benefits of handling your emotions properly, well, you're going to build resilience and self-awareness. Sadness processed through journaling fosters empathy and problem solving. Fear regulated through mindfulness enhances focus and reduces anxiety disorders, right? It improves relationships. Healthy expression prevents escalation and strengthens bonds, reducing isolation. It boosts mental clarity. Reappraisal techniques rewire the brain for optimism, lowering depression risk and increasing life satisfaction. Spiritual existential health benefits, right? Let's talk about those, right? When you manage your emotions in a healthy way spiritually, it fosters inner peace and growth. Accepting emotions like shame as signals for change promotes self-compassion and a renewed sense of purpose. Enhancing connection. Regulated emotions allow for vulnerability, leading to deeper, more meaningful relationships and a profound sense of alignment with life's flow. Cultivates emotional diversity. It cultivates emotional diversity through the experiencing of the full range of emotions, which builds wisdom and fulfillment, making life feel richer and more purposeful, right? So the more emotions you allow yourself to fully experience, of course, you gain wisdom, right? And fulfillment. In essence, corrective handling of emotions transforms negative emotions into catalysts for thriving, physically vital, mentally sharp, and increases your spiritual groundedness, right? So basically, when it comes to handling emotions in a positive way, it launches you to increase all those things: your physical, your mentally, your spiritually involved aspects of your life, right? So key takeaway: the same emotion can be a destructive force or a powerful teacher. It all depends on how we respond. In the context of unhealthy dynamics, learning to handle these emotions correctly is a game changer for reclaiming your health and building better relationships, right? Let's talk a little bit about some sub-emotions and we'll wrap this episode up, okay? Sub-emotions related to anger: frustration, a milder form of anger from blocked goals or obstacles, feeling irritated, persistent irritation, right? A low level annoyance or impatience, often from minor annoyances or repeated small triggers, right? Resentment, lingering bitterness or indignation from perceived unfair treatment that hasn't fully resolved. Envy, pain or resentment triggered by wanting what someone else has, focuses on others' possession. Jealousy, fear-based anger over losing something valuable to someone. Contempt, feeling of moral superiority or disdain towards someone seen as inferior or unworthy, right? Sub-emotions related to fear, right? Anxiety, anticipatory worry or unease about potential future threats, often vague and persistent. Panic, sudden intense surge of overwhelming fear with physical symptoms like racing heart, right? Dread, heavy or foreboding fear of something inevitable or impending. Insecurity, chronic doubt about one's worth, abilities, or safety in relationships or situations. Vulnerability, raw feeling of being exposed or at risk of emotional harm. Sub-emotions related to sadness, disappointment, letdown from unmet expectations or hopes, grief, Deep sorrow from significant losses like death or relationships ending, including mourning. Loneliness, a painful awareness of isolation or lack of meaningful connection. Guilt, remorse of having done or failed to do something wrong, often self-directed. Blame. Shame, an intense feeling of being fundamentally flawed or unworthy as a person. Regret, sadness mixed with wishing one had acted differently in the past. Sub-emotions related to joy, happiness, contentment, quiet satisfaction, and peace with one's current state. Gratitude, warm appreciation for something received or experienced. Pride, positive self-regard from achievement or affiliation, right? Relief, release of tension after a threat or worry passes. Amusement, light or playful enjoyment from something humorous. Awe, overwhelming wonder or reverence at something vast and profound. Sub-emotions related to surprise, confusion, mental disorientation from unexpected or conflicting information, curiosity, interest, motivated attention and desire to explore something novel, anticipation, excited or tense expectation of something upcoming. Sub-emotions related to disgust, embarrassment, self-conscious discomfort from the social missteps or exposure. Admiration, respect, appreciation for someone's qualities. Well, I don't think that's incorrect. I apologize. I'm catching that right now in my writing here. I think embarrassment it's definitely a good one to cover here when it comes to disgust as a sub-emotion, right? Trust, we can talk about if that's a feeling, right? Can result in admiration as a sub-emotion, where you're respecting or appreciating someone's qualities or achievements, or compassion or empathy, caring concern for another's suffering, right? And then we're going to move on to other complex sub-emotions there. Hope is a sub-emotion, which is optimistic expectation mixed with desire for positive outcomes. Love, right? Deep affection, combining joy, trust, and attachment, right? Embarrassment, we talked about that. Overwhelming, flooding feelings when multiple emotions or demands pile up, right? Boredom, lack of interest or stimulation, sometimes masking restlessness, right? It is of my opinion that boredom is a extreme risk to be experiencing, because we often don't make good choices from a position of boredom. Moving on, these sub-emotions help with emotional granularity, right? And which is the ability to precisely name feelings, which improves emotional regulation, as we discussed, right? So that was a lot of information. So it may take a few rewatches. I know that I will definitely watch this episode because it's so important to be emotionally regulated, right? So thank you for joining me for another episode of Knowledge for the Soul. Today we experienced what emotions really are. We talked about the full spectrum, from the basic ones like joy, fear, anger, and sadness, to the nuanced sub-emotions that color our everyday experiences: frustration, resentment, gratitude, vulnerability, shame, awe. We looked at why these emotions matter deeply for our health, how they shape our physical vitality, our psychological resilience, and sense of inner peace and purpose. We also faced the hard truth. When negative emotions go unaddressed and are handled in unhealthy ways, they can quietly erode our bodies, minds, and spirits. But when we learn to meet them with awareness, compassion, and skillful regulation, they become powerful allies, guiding us towards growth, stronger relationships, and a more fulfilling life. Emotional regulation is not about never feeling negative emotions. It's about not letting them hijack us. It's the difference between being swept away by a storm and learning to navigate through it with steady hands on the wheel. Mastering this skill through simple, consistent practices like naming what we feel, breathing through intensity, reframing thoughts, moving our bodies, And seeking support literally rewires our nervous system for greater calm, clarity, and connection, right? Keep in mind, there was an episode I did about the nervous system, right? It takes a little bit of time for the nervous system to change. Unlike our brains, our neuroplasticity of our brains, which is a little bit faster to change, the threading, the wires, right? Our nerve endings in our body takes longer to reform. Meaning that you're going to have to be consistent in these coping mechanisms before your nervous system adjusts, but be patient, right? When you do convert your nervous system for greater calm, it protects our health on every level and creates space for the relationships and the life that we really want. So here's my message to you as we close. You are not broken for feeling deeply. You are human. And every time you pause, name an emotion, breathe, and choose a healthy response instead of a reactive one, you are building strength. You are reclaiming your power. You are showing up for yourself in the most loving, courageous way possible. Keep showing up for that version of you. One breath, one honest feeling, one small regulated choice at a time. Life on the other side of better emotional awareness is freer, healthier, and more connected than you might imagine right now. If this episode spoke to you, take one thing with you today and try it. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And come back next time. We'll keep exploring the knowledge that helps us live more fully in our bodies, our minds, and our spirits. You can find all the episodes of Knowledge for the Soul on YouTube. You can find different quotes and little snippets of episodes on Instagram. And you can find episodes of Knowledge for the Soul on Spotify as well. Support however you see fit, whether it's subscribing, whether it's leaving a review, or sharing with somebody. And if you'd like to be a special guest on the episode here, contact me through one of those platforms, or you can email me at kfspodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, take care of your emotions so that they are taking care of you.